My name is Melanie, and I swear I didn't think a 5-word text could change everything I thought I knew about family. But that's exactly what happened the moment I landed back home after nearly a year away, exhausted and dragging a carry-on that had seen too many connecting flights, barely holding together like my patience. When I sent a simple message to our family group chat, "Flight lands at 5 p.m. Anyone around?" I had just gotten off the plane, standing near gate C-14 with my phone at 3% battery, my coat bunched under one arm, and a paper coffee cup with lipstick on the rim in the other, just praying someone, anyone, would answer. I hadn't been home since Mom's funeral 11 months ago, and every mile of distance I'd put between me and my hometown had been soaked in grief, avoidance, and quiet resentment, mostly at how things had fallen apart after she died. My older brother Greg had always been the golden one. Smart, dependable, the fixer of flat tires, and the speaker at family events, while I was the quiet one, the one who left, the one who chased a photography internship in Portland instead of staying close to home and being there for Dad. But when Mom passed, I did come home. I dropped everything, packed a bag, and sat beside her hospital bed for days, while Greg stayed home with his wife and kids, sending texts that read, "You're amazing for being there," as if words could make up for absence. Still, I didn't hold it against him. Not then. I thought we were still okay. I thought we still had that bond we always claimed was unbreakable. So when I sent that text, I expected a short, "Yeah, I'll swing by," or maybe even a "Dad will get you." But instead, after 5 minutes of silence in the group chat, Greg replied with something that knocked the breath out of me like a punch I never saw coming. "Not my job anymore." Just like that. No emoji. No follow-up. Not my job anymore. And that was it. My hand froze around the phone as if it had suddenly turned cold, and I stood there blinking, reading the words over and over while the terminal buzzed with families. Reuniting, couples kissing, old men in hats hugging grandchildren. But me? I was just standing there, alone, abandoned in a place that once meant home. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself maybe he meant it as a joke. Maybe he was having a bad day, but I knew better. That message wasn't careless. It was intentional. It had weight. Bitterness. A layer of something I didn't understand yet, but could feel like splinters under my skin. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Not right away. I just grabbed my suitcase and made my way toward the curb, where the Uber line stretched longer than I had the energy for. And as I stood under a gray sky that looked like it was deciding whether or not to rain, I kept hearing those words in my head, "Not my job anymore," and wondering when exactly I had become a burden to my own brother. The same brother who once held my hand when I broke my wrist in 3rd grade, who used to sneak me snacks through my bedroom door after curfew, who helped me move into my first dorm and gave me pepper spray with a note that said, "You'd better come home." And now I was here, back in the same city, same air, same bloodline, but apparently no longer his problem. I finally got a ride, sitting in silence as the driver played jazz softly on the radio and stared out the window while neighborhoods rolled past like old memories I didn't want to look too closely at. I was supposed to stay at Dad's. He knew I was coming. But when I pulled up to the driveway and rang the bell, no one answered. The lights were on. The TV glowed blue behind the curtains, but nothing. I tried calling. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. It felt like a joke, a bad dream. I was so tired I thought I might cry right there on the porch. But then the door creaked open just a little, and there was my father looking smaller than I remembered, eyes red-rimmed and confused, as if I was someone who didn't belong anymore. "Oh," he said, squinting, "you're here already?" I didn't know what hurt more, that he forgot, or that he didn't seem particularly glad to see me. Inside, the house looked the same, and nothing like it once had. Mom's plants were dead, her photo by the stairs was missing, and Greg's voice echoed faintly from a speakerphone call coming from the kitchen, his laugh sharp and confident, as if everything was fine. I stood there in the hallway with my bag still at my feet, and realized something I hadn't dared admit until that moment. I wasn't coming home. I was visiting someone else's life, a place I had been quietly erased from, and I hadn't even begun to understand why yet. I wanted to pretend it didn't sting. But as I stood there in the hallway, clutching the strap of my duffel bag and trying to shake off the chill that had settled in my spine, I realized this wasn't just miscommunication or awkward timing. This was exclusion, deliberate and quiet, the kind that builds over months of unspoken resentment, the kind that slowly rewrites your place in a family without ever saying it aloud. And the longer I stood in Dad's house, the more I could feel it. In the way the living room had been rearranged, as if to erase Mom's favorite chair, in the missing photo frames, in the quiet conversation echoing through the Bluetooth speaker where I could hear Greg talking to someone about his son's baseball game, laughing with a kind of ease I hadn't heard in months, like his life had moved on and I was still stuck in the waiting room, and I wanted to scream, to walk into that kitchen and ask him why. Why the cold text, why the distance, why I suddenly felt like a guest in the family I grew up with. But I didn't, because Dad finally motioned me inside, muttered something about the guest room being made up, and shuffled back toward his recliner like it was just another Tuesday and not the first time he'd seen me in almost a year. The silence in the house was heavy, not peaceful like it used to be, and I didn't unpack that night. I just sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly overhead, thinking back to when things started to fracture. When Mom got sick, when the stress cracked open all the ugly parts of us that we used to ignore. When Greg took control of everything from funeral arrangements to Dad's finances and acted like my presence was more of a complication than a comfort. I tried to call him that night, hoping we could talk like siblings, clear the air, maybe start over. But he didn't answer. Instead, he sent a voice note that started with a long sigh and ended with, "Mel, I can't keep doing this. You show up when it's convenient, expect things to be like before. They're not. We all moved on. You should too." And maybe he was right. Maybe I had been holding on to an idea of family that no longer existed. But I wasn't ready to give up without understanding why I was being cut out. Why my brother, who once swore he'd always have my back, now sounded like he was trying to push me out of the picture. The next morning, I made coffee in the same chipped mug Mom used to keep by the sink and tried to act normal, even as Dad barely said 2 words between bites of toast, even as the emptiness in the house felt louder than words. It wasn't until I visited Mom's grave that things really broke open. I stood there in the late afternoon sun holding a handful of daisies, because she always said roses were too formal, and told her everything, every ache, every question, every unanswered call. And it was there, in that quiet corner of the cemetery, that my phone buzzed again with a message from Jenna, Greg's wife. It said, "I don't know what Greg told you, but we're not trying to hurt you. It's just been complicated." And that word, complicated, hit me like a riddle I didn't have all the clues for. I asked her to meet for coffee, and to my surprise, she agreed. We met at a small cafe near the lake, a place we used to take walks by when we were still close, when she used to call me her sister-in-love and send me memes at midnight. She looked tired, older, sad, and when she finally started talking, the truth began to unravel like a thread pulled loose from a carefully woven story. "Greg's been different since the will," she said quietly, looking over her shoulder like she was afraid he'd walk in. "Since your mom passed, he's taken on everything, but it's changed him. He won't say it, but I think he blames you for leaving, for not fighting to stay more involved. And when your dad started needing help, Greg didn't think you'd want the responsibility." I blinked. "The will?" I asked, confused. She hesitated. "Wait, you don't know?" That's when it clicked. There was something I hadn't been told. Something big. Something that explained why Greg had built a wall, why my dad barely looked at me, why I felt like a stranger in my own life. Jenna fidgeted with her coffee cup and said, "Your mom left you the lake house." And for a second, I didn't understand. "The lake house?" I repeated. "She left it to you, in her private will. Greg found out after the funeral. Your dad was upset too. They thought she'd split everything evenly. But the house? It was just your name." My heart sank. Suddenly, the coldness, the distance, the avoidance. It made sense. Greg thought I had swooped in, stayed by Mom's side for a few days, and walked away with property. He thought I played the favorite, the hero. And Dad, who always believed in fairness, probably felt blindsided too. I didn't even know. No one had told me. I stared at Jenna, speechless, and all I could say was, "Why didn't anyone say anything?" She shrugged, eyes glassy. "Greg said you knew, that you didn't care. He told us to let it go." I left that cafe feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet. The people I loved most had turned me into a villain in a story I hadn't even read. And it all came down to a lie. Or maybe just a truth left unspoken. I knew I had to confront Greg. Not with anger, but with clarity. I needed answers. I needed my voice back. And most of all, I needed to find out what Mom's real wishes were. What she meant by leaving me the lake house. Because maybe, just maybe, that home wasn't just a gift. Maybe it was her way of leaving me something no one else could take away. I drove straight from the cafe to the lake house, heart pounding with a mix of anger, disbelief, and grief. Because if what Jenna told me was true, if Mom had left me this house intentionally and Greg had buried that truth, then I wasn't just grieving a fractured family anymore. I was mourning a betrayal that had rewritten years of closeness without my permission. And as I pulled up to the gravel driveway, everything looked the same. The old wind chimes by the porch still tinkled in the breeze, the faded blue shutters still framed the windows like a memory stuck in time, and I felt a wave of longing so intense it nearly knocked me to my knees. Because this house wasn't just a summer escape, it was the one place where Mom had always been the strongest version of herself, where we made blackberry jam and painted seashells and watched thunderstorms roll in while wrapped in blankets. And now it was mine, legally and silently gifted, a final whisper of love from her that no one had bothered to explain. And I walked through the front door with trembling hands, brushing dust from the entry table where she used to keep a bowl of lemon drops. And I half expected to hear her humming in the kitchen. But of course it was silent, except for the sound of my own breath, heavy and uneven, as I moved through the rooms like a stranger returning to her own childhood. Each creaking floorboard echoing memories of laughter, fights, bedtime stories, and quiet, comforting presence. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up reading every folder I could find, every envelope tucked behind photo albums, until I found it. Her letter. Dated 6 weeks before she passed. It wasn't long, barely a page, but in it, she said things I hadn't realized I needed to hear. That she knew I felt pushed out sometimes, that she saw the way Greg took control, that she was proud of me for the life I was trying to build, and that the lake house was her way of making sure I always had a place that was mine, not to compete, not to divide, but to remember, to heal, to belong. I cried harder than I had at her funeral, because now it all made sense. The will wasn't favoritism. It was restoration. It was her way of saying, I see you, after a lifetime of being the one who blended in, who kept the peace, who never demanded space. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not to fight, but to confirm. And yes, it was airtight. The house was mine. Greg had known. Dad had known. And they'd chosen to say nothing, letting me believe I was the outsider when I was actually the only one who hadn't abandoned her quiet wishes. I didn't rush to confront Greg. I waited. I spent a week in that house, fixing it up, dusting off the porch swing, cooking old recipes from Mom's stained notebook, letting the air settle around me like armor. And when I finally called him, I asked to meet in person. He sounded hesitant, maybe even annoyed, but he agreed. We met at Dad's house again, this time with Jenna quietly slipping into the dining room while we talked. I laid the letter on the table between us, watched his face change as he read it, and asked the one question I hadn't been able to stop thinking about. Why didn't you tell me? His hands were clenched, jaw tight, and for a moment he looked like the brother I used to trust, the one who helped me through my first breakup and taught me how to ride a bike. But that version had been buried under pride and hurt. Because you weren't there, he finally said. You left. You built your own life. You didn't have to stay and watch her fade away day by day. You don't get to swoop in and get rewarded for being absent. His words were knives, but I stayed calm. You're right, I said quietly. I left, but I also came back. I was there when she asked me to be. I didn't run. I just didn't live in the same city. And she knew that. She forgave that. You didn't. He didn't answer, just stared at the letter like it was written in a language he couldn't understand. And maybe it was. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something he knew how to give when resentment tasted so much easier. I didn't need his approval. I didn't even need his apology. What I needed was peace. And I had it now. As I left that house for the last time, Dad didn't say a word, just watched me from the porch, his face unreadable, and maybe that was all he had left to give. Silence, distance, a quiet kind of grief that couldn't be solved by words. But me? I had clarity now. I went back to the lake house and made a decision to turn it into something living. Not just a memory box, I renovated it, room by room, added a small writer's studio out back, started a blog about healing through estrangement and rediscovering identity, and within a year, it gained traction. People from all over writing. To say they too had been ghosted by their families, sidelined, silenced, made to feel small, I wasn't alone anymore. One day that blog caught the eye of a small publisher, then a podcast, then a network interested in a docuseries. And suddenly the story of the girl who wasn't picked up at the airport became something bigger, a voice for the forgotten, the overlooked, the second choices who turned into first-rate survivors. Greg never reached out again. Dad sent a birthday card once, unsigned. But I didn't wait for reconciliation anymore. I stopped measuring my worth by who showed up. Because I learned something powerful in that silence, that not being chosen by your family doesn't mean you're unworthy. Sometimes it just means your story needs a new audience. And mine found me the moment I landed at 5 p.m. and no one came.